All right, I'm now here with Branko Marcetic, Jacobin staff writer, the author of many recent articles, but we will be talking to him today about a new article he's written on how Democrats are botching the January 6th hearings and why they're not actually doing anything to safeguard democracy despite their claims. Branko, good to see you.
You too.
So, like I said, we will be diving into your thoughts on what Democrats are getting wrong about the January 6th hearings. But I wanted to open up by talking about the event of January 6th itself, because as you point out in your article, I think there's a little bit of contention on the left about what went down at the Capitol riots, and you point out that there is a segment of the left that I think has expressed some cynicism about January 6th and the subsequent hearings. And I'll just go ahead and out myself as being part of that segment. I obviously feel that democracy is under threat in the U.S. in a lot of ways, but when it comes to the Capitol riots, um, I'm not sure that I think Democrats should be making such a big spectacle about what happened, and not least because public opinion polls have indicated that lots of people are ready to move on, and the hearings just haven't been getting the traction that I think a lot of Democrats sort of hoped they would. But that's all to say. Just to start off, there's obviously a kind of impasse, right, on the left, where you have some people who kind of take the line that I take, and then other people who really see the January 6th attack as basically a fascist coup, as something that was very serious and should be treated as such. How do we move past this impasse? What do you think is the most useful way of understanding what happened on January 6th?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds about the event as well. I was as shocked and horrified as anyone else when I saw it happening on TV. I assumed kind of the worst, especially because of the wave of reporting that came out afterwards. A lot of it ended up being wrong. But there was a lot of stuff in there that was alarming, and some of it wasn't wrong. I mean, the pipe
Right.
bombs that were left outside the Democratic and Republican headquarters, that has not really been that crime hasn't been solved. So that was really serious. But over time, I watched a lot of the footage of January 6th, and read a lot of stuff, and followed a lot of the developments about it, and my views kind of started to shift. And I realized, I've been resistant to go in this direction of calling it an insurrection, in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
this was an attempt to overthrow the government. I mean, it was an attempt to, I guess, block the transfer of power, but as a attempt to actually overthrow the government by force, that doesn't quite pan out to me. I mean, the best example of this is if you watch the video of Ashley Babbitt being shot.
Yeah.
There's this massive crowd of people who are, kind of standing outside the locked doors, which are barricaded. Some of the protesters start to try and bash the windows in to get in. Ashley Babbitt ends up climbing through, and then she's shot, and immediately the crowd is in complete shock and freezes. And ultimately, they start clearing the way for police to come in and medical people to come in to take her out, and everyone kind of just starts to dissipate. Now, most armed overthrows of government, if one, they're not stopped by a single gunshot, and then secondly, if there is a gunshot, if one of them is killed, there tends to be kind of inflaming of anger. So that was one of the things that made me change my mind, and other similar things. I mean, I think for me the bottom line is, look, it was an event that could have been so much worse than it was,
Right.
because if there had been a concerted effort to bring in weapons and actually try and kill or kidnap lawmakers or God knows what else, beyond just kind of maybe a few armed people here and there, they could have easily come in with the rush of bodies and done all manner of stuff and caused all manner of mayhem. So that could have been a lot worse, but that didn't happen. And researchers have who have looked over the people who were arrested on the day and other people who were involved. They concluded that the vast majority of these people, they were not members of right-wing militias. They were basically ordinary Trump supporters who had basically been brainwashed by this lie that the election had been stolen. And they saw themselves, whether we think their actions are good or not, they saw themselves as kind of coming to the aid of American democracy. Now, that's completely delusional, obviously. What they would have been doing is unwittingly helping democracy get snuffed out and helping Trump overturn the election. But, these people, they watched cable news and they trusted Trump, and that's what they believed. So I think it's a tough one. I think we have to hold two ideas into account, that this event was bad and dangerous and could have been really, really much worse than it was. But also that it wasn't, at least the protest itself wasn't quite the kind of attempt at an armed revolution that I guess people have been portraying. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be worse next time. And I think that's the worrying thing.
So let's now jump ahead to the January 6th hearings, which, began a while ago and have sort of continued to unfold. These hearings have primetime billing. They're this like highly televised event. It's clear that many Democrats are very much hoping that these hearings will kind of call attention to how bad the Republican Party is and thereby give Democrats a boost in the upcoming midterms, which are not looking good for them so far. I've already expressed some of my doubts about that strategy, but I would like to hear your thoughts. Is this likely to work in the way that Democrats think it will?
Yeah, I mean, it's an attempt to redo the strategy, I guess, of 2016 and to some extent the strategy of 2020, where if you just hype up how bad the other side is. And, look, I mean, of course, the Republican Party is a profoundly illiberal party. It has increasingly gone into the extremes over the past, few decades, but particularly over the last 10 years. The Republican Party, as Noam Chomsky says, is the most dangerous organization on the planet, not just because of its undemocratic tendencies, but also because of things like its complete denial of climate change and other issues. So it is important to find a way to stop this kind of thing from happening again. The question is reminding people how bad and unscrupulous and irresponsible and how much of a liar Trump is that going to do it? Is reminding people that the Republicans are really bad and you shouldn't vote for them because they're going to do bad things, going to do it. I mean, it didn't work in 2016. It worked in 2020 because there was a very unique confluence of massive crises that made the imperative to get Trump out, a much bigger thing. But I'm skeptical. I mean, if you look at the polling, number one, most people don't care about January 6th. The Democratic base does. Because it's constantly on cable news, and the reason it's on cable news is because it's an attempt for ratings for them, but because people who watch these channels all the time are watching this stuff, or if they're reading the New York Times, and other liberal papers, they're obsessed with this stuff. They tend to get obsessed as well, so they care about it a lot. The actual, say, Republican voters, for instance, don't really care that much about it. I mean, there was a poll in the New York Times a couple of weeks back, which showed that the majority of the people who are intending to vote for Republicans these midterms see the economy as the main thing. It's unfortunately the Democratic leaning voters who don't view the economy as a priority. They view January 6th and gun control and abortion as the biggest issues. So I think if you wanted to move the needle there, you would have to, rather than focus on the stuff that already animates Democrats, people who are going to vote for Democrats no matter what, you'd look at what is going to move the needle for Republican voters. And I think that would be the economy. And look, the Democrats have done hearings where they have, taken corporate profiteers to task and highlighted some of these issues, but they haven't made a kind of primetime issue the same way as they have with January 6th. I mean, look, maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll drive a massive turnout of Democratic voters who are angry, not just about January 6th, but also Roe v. Wade being gutted. Maybe that will end up driving them to the polls. But I think that's a bit of a risk. And I just don't think, I don't think independents are that concerned about this issue either, to be honest.
Right. So the other thing is that, the January 6th hearings are ostensibly about are supposed to be kind of like a bipartisan effort to like rescue or restore democracy, right? That's very much how they're being framed by the people who are running the hearings. But you argue in your article that they actually sort of miss or misconstrue like the actual threats that U.S. democracy is facing today. Talk a little bit about that. Why aren't these hearings actually doing anything to salvage democracy and or the fair election process?
Well, as I said before, the most of the hearings are focused on reminding us how bad Trump is,
Yeah.
and to a lesser extent, the Republicans. Okay, that's fine. But the threats to American democracy come not just from Trump. I mean, we're basically repeating the same mistake that we made this entire last 6 years, where the way that the liberal establishment has chosen to look at Trump's election is that Trump is a unique evil. He's the problem with the Republican Party and with American politics. And if we just get rid of Trump, if we just have him out of the picture, all these other problems will disappear, even though they're the same issues that actually led Trump to get elected in the first place. So I have advocated looking at some of these structural issues, which may not on the surface seem like they are directly related to January 6th, but I think really are. One of which is the corporate domination of news media. This is not how it always was in the United States. This is partly the product of deregulation under the Clinton administration, and other deregulatory efforts that happened earlier under Reagan, that mean that now there's this intense corporate concentration in the media, which means that you get cable news outlets that are able to hold sway over large populations and get away with saying all kinds of untrue and misleading things. And it's not just Fox News. It's not just the right. I think anyone who reads Jacobin is probably well aware that MSNBC and CNN engage in their own kind of, whatever you want to say, misinformation as well. So, that's one thing. The role of money in politics, that was a big part of this. The money that flowed to these Republican lawmakers who were willing to assist Trump in basically blocking the transfer of power and to overturn the election. They were getting a lot of funding from every moneyed interest that tends to dominate in American politics. I mean, so you have to take action on that as well. I think you have to look at things like the infiltration of law enforcement around the country by extreme right-wing forces. The police and other law enforcement were a fairly strong contingent of the people who stormed the Capitol. We know, years before this, that the FBI was looking at white supremacist infiltration of police. That nothing has really been done about that. Any rational, sensible society would look at this and say, well, we have to clean house. I mean, whatever you think about the role of the police and what the police do in society, surely having actual white supremacists and neo-Nazis in their ranks is something that we can all oppose, right? And then finally, the one element that I think has been sorely ignored through this whole thing, basically to make the case that, this is all about Trump and how bad he is why the security was as bad as it was on that day. I mean, it's a cliche to say at this point, but we all know if it was abortion rights protesters or Black Lives Matter protesters who had gathered outside the Capitol in those numbers, they would never have been even allowed to get close enough to the steps to be able to try and charge in and overwhelm the police. We know that there were frequent intelligence warnings that this was going to happen, that there was maybe going to be violence, and for whatever reason those intelligence reports were not passed on. The Capitol Police were unprepared. They didn't have the right equipment, or they had faulty equipment. They didn't have nearly the numbers they did. I mean, if you look at some of the videos that the hearings produced, you can see this just massive crowd of protesters, charging to get to the Capitol, and then, like a handful of police standing in their way. Anyone who's gone to a protest in DC if it when it's not stop to steal, knows how big the police presence is, even when the protests aren't that big. So that's the big question. Why did this happen? There was a whistleblower that came forward last year, I believe, and said, these two officials in the Capitol Police, they were promoted. And even though they didn't do anything, they completely failed. They didn't pass on the intelligence about possible violence in the day. They didn't lift a finger to help the police when they were being overwhelmed. And the whistleblower said that the Congress members of Congress basically were not investigating this. That they knew that there was a serious flaw with the Capitol Police, and they had basically covered up whatever went wrong and didn't want to tell the public the truth about what happened. And the reason why is I think pretty self-evident, because basically if you look at how the hearings have been structured, there's been a big push to portray the police and the Secret Service in this very heroic kind of role, and all of that is kind of to put the focus on Trump and how bad he is, and I guess to sort of appeal to Republican voters who might sympathize with the police. But the result of that is that we don't know why the security failure happened, and that I think is the biggest piece of this that is just going completely uninvestigated.
So maybe as a final kind of related question, what do you think a substantive effort by Democrats to either, shore up or even expand our current democracy could look like? I think that something that we've sort of been getting at is that election denialism, obviously is a huge problem, a huge and growing problem. And, there are many things that we can do to expand sort of voting rights in the US. Aside from the January 6th stuff, what do you think the Democrats can be doing?
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff that has been discussed over the past years, the idea of making it just easy to vote, to make it, to expand mail-in balloting, to have a federal holiday for voting, so that people aren't having to, wait, somehow balance going to work while also, doing their basic kind of civil democratic service. You could talk about this is a bit of a kind of fantasy wish list, but of course, changing the unrepresentative nature of American democracy, the way the political system is structured, it obviously privileges a minority over the majority. For a lot of people, this kind of just makes it seem like their vote isn't worth a whole lot. All of this stuff. And I think also some of the things I mentioned before. I think, getting rid of the corporate concentration of media, having some sort of regulation, not so much on the speech, but at least on the crossover of business and news reporting, I think that would go a long way, first of all, to restoring trust in the press, which of course is a institution that's pretty essential and critical to the functioning of democracy. But it would also get rid of some of these incentives that exist for sensationalistic and misleading reporting. So there's a very non-exhaustive list. I'm sure I could, with a little more time, give you dozens more ideas. But I think just anything to make it easier for voting, anything that increases the trust and transparency for people. I would just add, it's not just the Republicans that engage in some of these electoral shenanigans. I think anyone watching this might remember some of the stuff that the Democratic Party pulled during the Democratic primary when Biden had all but sewed it up. But there was still a chance that things could have gone wrong for the establishment candidate. And we saw basically the party threatening state parties that, if you delay your primaries, we're going to halve the amount of delegates you get and all this kind of stuff. And basically push for elections to keep happening, even though the pandemic was, at the time, raging. So it's not just the Republican Party. I think we have to also clean house among the other major party in the United States. But those are a few ideas, I guess.
All right, Branko Marcetic, again, a staff writer at Jacobin. We will link his latest article below. Branko, good to see you as always.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.